Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to North Shore. That's right. You can clap. It's good to be here. We're so glad you're here. Yeah. All right. It's November. It's raining. Let's clap. All right. Here we go. I love it. And welcome those of you who are joining us online, wherever you're joining us from. Maybe you're in a sunny place right now, and we're excited for you for that. But I'm glad that all of you are here on this Veterans Day weekend. And can we just pause and take a moment and say thank you to the veterans in our community, and maybe some of you who are joining us online. Yeah. We are so grateful for your service and sacrifice for others. And as you just heard a few minutes ago, we're launching again for the second time our giving tree this year. We're aiming to raise a total of $60,000 because we want to bless over 1,500 kids. And we're asking 100% of you to give and be part of that, and we're going to give 100% of that away. So it's a really exciting opportunity for us to kind of lean into our vision to be a church together for our neighbors, the next generation, and those in need. And I hope you'll consider being part of it. But for those of you who call North Shore home, I just want to take this opportunity as you're thinking about that and the ways that we can be generous with our neighbors. I want to take this moment to remind you that the reason we're able to do projects like Giving Tree, the reason we're able to raise money and then give it all away is because so many of you faithfully give week after week, month after month, paycheck after paycheck. So we can do things like hire staff and run kids ministry and start life groups and develop leaders and improve the facility. And just so you know, the next 6 weeks of the year is the most important season in terms of financial giving for our church. About a third, about 30% of our general budget is funded between now and the end of the calendar year, which is for this year about $1.6 million, which may sound like a lot, I know, but it's a target we will easily reach if we are all faithful to God in our giving. So we'll spend there'll be a few times over these next few weeks where we will update you on progress and how things are going on that front, just so you know. And by the way, if you're not giving and you want to try it, but you're not sure, it sounds risky, it's a church, like what's going to happen, I just want to invite you to sign up for what we call the Tithe Challenge. There's little cards in the seat in front of you that explain all of how this works, but basically, you sign up to tithe, which means give 10% of your income for 90 days. And if you're not convinced that God is faithful to you over those 90 days, we will give you your tithe back because we believe that God will be faithful. And again, there's cards that explain how that works. And just think for a moment about what God could do, just what God could do if we were a fully tithing church. I mean, we could ensure that no kids in the school district go without food. We could double our support to families and individuals who are living through crisis in this pandemic. We could make critical improvements to our facility, both physically and digitally for online. So I hope you'll pray about it, and I hope you'll be part of what God is doing here at North Shore. And if you want to give, you can just go to northshore.church/give, or you can make gifts in the boxes on the way out. And for those of you who give, again, week after week, paycheck after paycheck, thank you for your generosity. You are making such a difference in so many lives, and so we're so grateful. Which brings me to what we're talking about this weekend in this series that we're calling How to Stand For What You Believe In, not how to stand against what they believe in. And they could be anybody in your life. They could be those liberals or those conservatives, whoever they are. It's how to stand for what you believe in, because it's easy to stand against something, right? I mean, anybody could stand against something. It just takes having a social media account and kind of going for it. You can stand against stuff. But what does it look like to stand for what you believe in a way that points people to God and not away from Him? And to answer that question, we've been walking through this really interesting book in the Old Testament, this book called Daniel. And Daniel takes place in one of the most difficult seasons in the lives of God's people, Israel. Jerusalem had just been conquered. The temple had just been destroyed. And God's people had been taken into exile in this foreign land called Babylon. And they had lost everything they held dear. They couldn't worship the way they used to. They couldn't practice life the way they used to. It was kind of a worst case scenario. Ever been through what felt like to you like a worst case scenario in your life? You know, when it feels like the wheels come off or the rug gets pulled out from underneath you. What do you do then? Like, how do you make it through? My friend John once told a story about this unique survival manual that he found online. I don't know if it's a real thing or not, but it included this set of instructions on what to do if you're attacked by an anaconda, which is like the largest snake in the world. And I'm not sure this is real, but I thought I would share it with you just in case you ever run across an anaconda snake. So a few steps it says. Step 1, if you are attacked by an anaconda, do not run. The snake is faster than you are, so don't try to outrun it. Okay. Step 2, lie flat on the ground, put your arms tight against your sides and your legs tight against one another. That sounds kind of like a bad idea, but let's keep going. Number 3, tuck in your chin. Okay, step 4, the snake will come and begin to nudge and will climb about your body. That's sort of terrifying. Number 5, do not panic. Okay, number 6, after the snake has examined you, it will begin to swallow you from the feet, always the feet. Permit the snake to swallow your feet and ankles. Do not panic. I don't know where this is going. Step 7, the snake will begin to suck your legs into its body. You must lie perfectly still. This will take a long time. Okay? Step 8, when the snake has reached your knees, slowly and with as little movement as possible, reach down, take your knife, and very gently slide it into the side of the snake's mouth, between the edge of its mouth and your leg. Then suddenly rip upwards, severing the snake through the top of the head. Step 9, be sure your knife is sharp. Step 10, be sure you have your knife with you. Some of you are thinking, I'm never coming back to this church. This is weird, this is crazy. Some of you are thinking, I'm home. Like, I love this place. Like, this sounds exciting. Now, again, I don't know if that story or list is true, but here's what I know. Bad things happen. Sometimes unexpectedly. Sometimes quite tragically. Sometimes it feels like we're just thrown into the worst case scenario. A few weeks ago, I was with a small group of pastors who were meeting with a Christian writer and leader named Henry Cloud. Some of you know his books. And he said that if the devil wanted to create a worst case scenario for like basic human functioning, it would be COVID. Because COVID basically broke down the fundamental elements of how we're made to live. It severed our sense of community and belonging. Of course, we know that. It disrupted and broke down the rhythms and structures of everyday life, our schedules, our commutes, our trips to the gym, stuff like that. It took away our sense of control over everyday decisions, like how we work and how we go to school and how we gather. And then it left everyone feeling this kind of learned helplessness, which is one of the reasons why so many people are so agitated and angry, bitter and discouraged. In fact, get this, the percentage of the population with diagnosable anxiety, depression, or addiction before COVID was estimated to be around 16% or so of the population, which sounds like a lot to me. But now, get this, today, it's well over 40%. 40% estimated number of people or percentage of people who would be able to be diagnosed with addiction or anxiety or depression. But think about it, in 2019, nobody knew this was coming. Like nobody knew it was coming because you just can't always know when the worst case scenario is coming. Just like you didn't know that diagnosis was coming. You didn't know that job loss was coming. You didn't know that miscarriage was coming. And the Israelites who were taken into exile, they didn't know it was coming either. I mean, God gave them plenty of warnings along the way, but they didn't know they'd never see their homes again. They didn't know they'd never be able to worship at the temple again, at least the ones that were taken, so many of them. And they didn't know they would soon be facing a literal worst case scenario like the one we're about to look at today. So if you have a Bible or Bible app on your phone, you can open to the book of Daniel chapter 3, or you can follow along with me right here on the screen. Story starts this way. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, just so you can visualize what this is like, 60 cubits is about 90 feet tall. This is a really tall statue. And we don't know, we're not told why Nebuchadnezzar made it. Maybe he was kind of vain. Maybe he thought Babylon needed like just another statue. Maybe he was compensating for something. We don't know. All we know is he built this really big statue and he wanted everybody to see it. Because look at what follows. It says, the king then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, and magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. And so the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Now, just so you know, this repetition of all these people is just a way of saying everybody's there, right? All the leaders, all the celebrities, all the influencers, everybody's there, everybody's watching. And then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, sometimes when we read a story like this, when we look back and hear a story like this, we might think, I would never fall down and worship some big gold statue somewhere. Like, I would never do something like that. But what we need to remember is they didn't do this because it felt evil or immoral. They did this because it felt necessary. Worship the statue or what? End up in a furnace. It's kind of like a no-brainer decision. You see, simple thing, because people turn to idols not because it feels rebellious, but because it feels beneficial, feels helpful, can feel even wise at times. I mean, think about it. We put our trust in money. Why? Because it feels helpful. It gives us a sense of security about our future. We idolize things like comfort. Why? Because it feels beneficial. It sounds a lot better than discomfort or being uncomfortable, right? And you never know when a pandemic's going to hit or when the market's going to crash. And so it can feel helpful, beneficial, almost wise to have these go-to idols, these go-to security blankets in our lives that can help us deal with the adversity or uncertainty that we're all going to face. And think about this. Nebuchadnezzar didn't say you can't still worship your God. He didn't say that. There's another story in the book of Daniel where that's the case, and we'll get to that in a couple of weeks. But in this case, he doesn't say that you can't pray, or you can't go to church, or you can't read your Bible, or you can't worship your God. He just said, it's your God plus my statue. And this is really important because here's how idolatry works. An idol isn't usually in place of God. It's usually in addition to God. Idolatry at its core is kind of God plus. It's that feeling you have like, I love God, I want to trust God, I want to go to church, I want to believe in God, but to be really secure, I need God plus a great job, or I need God plus getting married, or I need God plus financial security, or I need God plus a successful career. You see, so much of our idolatry in our lives, it isn't this kind of gross, immoral, anti-God stuff, it's just God plus. I just want to name, just so you know, this doesn't mean that it's a sin to have other passions or pursuits in our lives. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't get married because you might need your spouse. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't save money because you might need your savings. God wants us to have passions and pursuits in our lives, but we have to be on guard against that propensity, that temptation to cling to them or to lean on them or depend on them, especially when life is hard. And by the way, just so you know, it's this kind of God plus perspective. That was the reason why God allowed Babylon to invade and conquer Israel. That was the reason. In fact, when the Israelites asked the prophet Jeremiah, why did this happen? What did we do wrong? God told the prophet Jeremiah to say, it is because your ancestors forsook me and followed other gods and served and worshiped them. So I will throw you out of this land into a land neither you nor your ancestors have known, and there you will serve other gods day and night, for I will show you no favor. And that's exactly what they did when they were in Babylon. Look what happened next in Daniel's story. Therefore, as soon as everybody who was gathered heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language, which means including the Israelites who were there, they all fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Everybody kneeled. Everybody worshiped. And in a way, it doesn't sound like a big thing. It's like, okay, it's just this moment. We've been called out there. We'll kind of get over it. We'll get through it. We'll go back to our lives. It can't be that big of a problem. Everybody kneeled. Everybody worshiped, except for these three young men named Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Or as the Babylonians called them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember 2 weeks ago we learned these were Daniel's closest friends. Like Daniel, they resolved not to eat the royal food. Like Daniel, they were stronger and wiser than all the other king's men. And like Daniel, they were promoted higher and faster than everybody else. So question, do you think that made them more or less popular with the rest of the team? Less popular, like a lot less. And some of those guys went to Babylon and went to Nebuchadnezzar, kind of ratted them out. They said, there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, like some high up guys named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So this is kind of like the way they landed, the way they say it. Now, remember, Nebuchadnezzar didn't see any of this happen. Like he has no idea what's going on. Otherwise, he wouldn't need somebody to tell him. Which means Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't trying to make a statement or kind of create a bunch of attention around themselves. They were just trying to be faithful. They were just trying to be faithful. And this matters why? Because I see more and more Christians today who are acting as if faith is all about how loud you can yell or how quick you can blame or how many fingers you can point, how much social media you can post, but it's not. It's all about how faithful you can live whether it gets noticed or not. And most of the time, the decisions that matter, the ones that actually matter, are the ones that nobody sees, nobody notices. Like who you are in your work when nobody's looking. What you look at online when nobody's looking. How you talk about other people when nobody's looking. But in this case, somebody else was looking. Somebody noticed, and they informed the king. And the text says, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he calls them to a meeting. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Like, is this a real story? So now, when you hear the sound, he's going to give them another chance. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, pipe, and all kinds of music. Don't you love all the lists in this chapter? I mean, there's just list after list. If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. End of story. No problem. We'll move on. Back to your posts. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. And this is a key question. Just kind of flag this one if you're kind of following along. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? In other words, your God may be strong, but he's not that strong. Your God may be able, but he's not that able. You see, the enemy doesn't care if you believe that God exists. The enemy doesn't care if you go to church on the weekends. The enemy doesn't care if you read your Bible or not. His goal is to convince you that God isn't able, that he isn't able to deliver you, that he isn't able to heal you, that he isn't able to provide for your needs. Because when you doubt that God is able, no matter how much you go to church, you're going to choose an idol. You're going to choose some kind of security blanket that helps you feel like, well, at least I've got this when God doesn't come through. And remember, there's a reason that they would be scared. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar was the strongest guy in the room. He could build a fire, make it hot, send soldiers to throw these guys in with a snap of a finger. But here's the thing. When it comes to real power, the strongest guy in the room isn't the strongest guy in the room. Kind of like that old story some of you know about a strong man at a circus. At the end of his act, he would take a sponge full of water and he would wring out all the water with his strong arms and he would squeeze out every last drop. And then he would offer $100 to anyone who would come up and squeeze even one more drop of water out of that sponge. And nobody could do it until the day came when a small kind of nerdy guy with glasses came up, walked up, took the sponge, and he squeezed out a whole nother glass of water. And the strong man was stunned. He said, who are you? And what do you do? And the guy said, I work for the IRS. You'll get it on the way home, okay? Anyway, I didn't think it was that funny of a story either, but it illustrates the point. When it comes to whatever situation you're facing, the strongest thing in the room isn't them, and it isn't you, and it isn't your circumstances, it's God. And that's exactly what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego tell the king. They say, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. The God we serve is able. The God we serve is able. meaning he can heal, he can restore, he can renew, he can raise up, he can bring comfort, he can forgive. And so go on, King, throw us in because our God is able. It's a pretty powerful picture of how to stand up for what you believe in, isn't it? But here's the thing. Their faith in God runs even deeper than that. Because even though they believe God is able to deliver them, they also face this question that we all face in life. What if God doesn't? Ever ask that question? Like, what if God doesn't heal? What if God doesn't answer? What if God doesn't deliver? What if God doesn't keep us from the fire? I mean, it's one thing to stand up for what you believe in if God answers, if God delivers, but what if he doesn't? What do you do then? What do you say then? Well, I can tell you what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said. They looked Nebuchadnezzar in the eye with the blazing fire in the background. They said, we believe God is able, but get this, but even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Friends, that's faith. That's faith. Even if God doesn't. Not just believing that God delivers, it's standing firm even when he doesn't. There's a woman here in our church who's been battling cancer for years, in and out of the hospital, in and out of terrible pain and discomfort. And even though God hasn't healed her, she keeps praying and trusting and worshiping. That's faith, even if God doesn't. I have a friend who's been hoping to get married for years. He's been faithful. He's lived the right way, but it just hasn't happened. But he's not given up. He's not told God just to take a hike. He's still praying. He's still trusting. That's faith, even if God doesn't. And you might think, I would hope you would think this kind of faith would inspire Nebuchadnezzar, to make him say, wow, it's amazing. I wish there were more guys like you around here, but it doesn't. Just the opposite happens. Nebuchadnezzar gets even angrier, and he cranks up the fire 7 times hotter, and he commands his strongest soldiers to take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the fire. And the fire is so hot, the soldiers are actually killed just throwing them in, which should be the end of the story, shouldn't it? And being thrown into a furnace usually is. But look what happens next. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. And he said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. By the way, who do you think that is? A little later in the story, we found out that Nebuchadnezzar thought it was an angel, which is possible. But to me, it sure sounds more like someone else God would send into the world 700 years later. One who was truly the Son of God. And he knows a thing or two about living through worst case scenarios. Remember, Jesus was born into poverty, and he was raised as a refugee. And then after his ministry, he was wrongly accused, arrested, mocked, beaten, tortured. And he prayed to God, God, please take this cup from me because I know you can. But even if you don't, God, I'll be faithful. Your will, not mine. Faithful all the way to the end. And he was. All the way to a cross and all the way to a tomb, which should be the end of the story. Getting buried in a tomb usually is. But then on the 3rd day, what happened? He rose as if to declare to the world, while God may not save you from the fire, he can save you in it. And friends, God can do that in your life as well. In your marriage, with your health, with that loved one. God is able to deliver you, but even if he doesn't, you can still trust him. You can still count on him because there's always a 4th man in the fire. There's always a 4th man in the fire. And by the way, it's so interesting. By the way, this is the kind of faith that can transform places like Babylon. Not a self-righteous or insolent or finger-pointing faith, but a humble, resilient, even if God doesn't kind of faith. How do I know? Because after Nebuchadnezzar saw the three men were okay, he called them out of the furnace, and look at what he said. Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except for their own God. You see, now even Nebuchadnezzar knows there's a God who is stronger than him. And one day, the kings of our world, the people of our world, will find this out too, that they are not the strongest in the room, and neither are we. God is. And our number one job, friends, our number one job in life in Babylon is just to keep trusting him, even when it feels like the worst case scenario. I want to close our time with a story that I want to share, and it's a story that's a little hard to hear, but the family gave me permission to share it. A couple weeks ago, a couple here in our church asked me to pray for their friends, Joe and Ann Baker, who live in Colorado Springs. Joe and Ann were pregnant with their fourth child. They have 3 boys, so they were praying for a girl, and their fourth was a little baby girl that they had already named Ember, which, as you know, just means a little glowing remains of a fire. Ember was perfectly healthy and strong inside her mother, except for one thing. Her nervous system happened to be connected to her mother's in just such a way that it meant it was going to be impossible for her to survive outside the womb. And when they got the news, it was just beyond devastating, unspeakable. And naturally, they cried out to God day after day, do something, do something, do something. But God didn't answer that prayer that way. Instead, he walked with them as they prayed and grieved. He surrounded them with friends and family and loved ones every single day. They even decided to take Ember to all their favorite places before she was born, just so they could experience those places together. And then just a few weeks ago, they scheduled both the delivery and the funeral for the same week. And on Thursday, November 4th, little Ember was born, that little glowing fire of a life. And her parents held her in their arms. They took pictures and they gave kisses. And Ember was with them for 1 hour and 6 minutes before she went to be with Jesus. But somehow, even though they will never get over this grief, they will never get beyond this loss, somehow the story they told at the memorial was one of hope, not despair, as over 60,000 people watched online. They were able to share that even though God didn't, as Joe put it, the Maker is still good, and he will take care of you. Why? Because there's always a fourth man in that fire. It's just like what God said through the prophet Isaiah, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, and you're going to walk through the fire, everybody goes through the fire, but you won't be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze, because there's always a fourth man in that fire. And friends, he can be that fourth man for you today. I know that some of you are walking through a fire in your life right now, in your family or your work or with a loved one. Some of you are facing a challenge that just feels impossible. And while I can't promise you that God will keep you from the fire, I can promise you this: if you trust him, if you cling to him, if you hang on to him right now, you'll always find him standing right there with you. And somehow, that's even better. So I want to give you a chance right now to place your hope, place your faith, place your trust in the God who stands with you in the fire. So if you'd bow your heads just for a moment, close your eyes with me. And I just want to say that choosing to trust God in the fire is the most important decision you could ever make in your life. This moment could be a turning point in your life, not in a way that changes your circumstances, but could change who's with you in those circumstances. So I want to give you a chance right now. Some of you, you've been living that kind of God plus life, trying to manage the adversity or anxiety with the other little security blankets, and it's time to put a stake in the ground and say, Jesus, I will trust you alone. And you could do that right now. Say, Jesus, I trust you. And some of you have never even made that decision before. You've never placed your trust fully in God's hands. And I want to give you a chance to do that right now. You can say just these simple words, Jesus, I believe that you're the fourth man in the fire. You can tell him, Jesus, I believe that you came into the world to die for my sins and to walk with me through whatever I'm walking through and to give me hope in this life and the next. Just tell him that. Just tell him that. Just tell him you want to trust him right now. And just to, again, put a stake in the ground, just to remember this moment. If that's your prayer, if it's your first time to say, Jesus, I'm trusting you in the fire, just with nobody looking, I just want you to raise your hand just for a moment. Thank you. I see that hand. Thank you. I see another one. Thank you. It's your moment. Just raise that hand. Amen. Put those hands down. Right now, Jesus is standing right next to you. For those of you who've made that decision, who raised that hand, Jesus is right with you. And he promises to never leave, no matter how hot the fire gets or how long it seems to last. He will walk with you. Because remember, he came and gave his life on a cross for you. And he went into the ground, was buried in a tomb, and out of that silence, out of that darkness, came this roaring new life when he rose. As if to say, the grave, the fire, the furnace has no claim on us anymore. And that's his promise to you. And Jesus, we're so grateful for you, for that promise to us. And we pray this in your name. And everybody said, amen. Hey, as we close in this one last song, I just want to invite you, those of you who raised your hand, and I know this may sound like a hard thing to do, but if you raised your hand, if you made that decision, there's going to be a team of people up front, both in this song and after the service. I want to invite you to come on forward, even if it feels a little bit awkward, to come on down and receive prayer, because you need to be reminded, just in this moment, you are not alone. God is with you. So as we sing, as we worship the one true God, the God of the fire, come on forward as you feel led. Let's sing.